All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch. I hope you enjoyed the performances. I'm just going to start off by introducing the wonderful, the one and the only, Jacqueline Francis. So I'm just going to go back through her credentials because it's been a little while. Jackie did not want me to do this, but she is the author of Making Race, Modernism, and Racial Art in America. We have it downstairs. Yeah. She is the co-editor of Romare Bearden, American Modernist, in 2011. She's working on a new book about African-American artists' participation in federally funded art programs of the 1930s and their impact on the emergent U.S. art markets of the 1940s. Recently, she has published articles on contemporary artists, Olivia Moll, Joan Jonas, Andrea Fraser, and David Hammonds, and on the hot topic of fair use. Forthcoming are essays on Romare Bearden, Micheline Thomas, and Carrie James Marshall. With Kathy Czar, who's also a professor at CCA, Francis co-curated the art exhibition Where Is Here, which was at MoAD from October 2016 to May 2017. Jackie Francis.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And of course, always thanks to our team here at MoAD for making us all feel at home. So our panelists here, Adama, Fawundu, and Chris Johnson are going to talk a little bit about their work. And I'm not sure how many people were here this morning and heard extensive biographies. A lot? Okay. Look, yeah, okay. I feel like I want to say a few words about both Adama and about Chris. So Adama is a visual artist born in Brooklyn, New York, to parents from Sierra Leone and Equatorial Guinea in West Africa. She has an MFA from Columbia University. She is a co-founder and an independent publisher of a book called Mfan, which is Women Photographers of the African Diaspora. She had a book tour with talks about this project at the Tate Modern in London, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York, and Harvard University. And the book is in many libraries across the world, including the Victoria and Albert Museums in London, as well as the International Center of Photography in New York and Harvard's. In recognition of her artistic practice, Ms. Fawundu was nominated for and won the Rima Hort Mann Emerging Artist Award, named OK's Africa's 100 Women Making an Impact on Africa and its Diaspora. And if she was included in the Royal Photographic Society's 100 Heroines in 2018. She has exhibited internationally with 2 solo shows in 2019 at the African American Museum in Philadelphia and Crush Curatorial Gallery in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood. So please welcome Adama. You prefer to use Delphine though, right?
It's both are fine.
Okay, all right. All right, and at the end of the dais here is Chris Johnson, who is a photographic and video artist, curator, and writer. He is a full professor and chair of the photography program at California College of the Arts. Chris studied photography with Ansel Adams, Imogen Cunningham, and Wynne Bullock, each path-breaking artists of the 20th century American modernist movement. His photographic artwork has been exhibited in gallery and museum shows, including the Smithsonian and the Oakland Museum of California. Chris is the author of The Practical Zone System for Film and Digital Photography, currently in its 6th edition. From 1997 to 2000, he was the director of the Mother Jones International Fund for Documentary Photography. He also has served as the chair of the City of Oakland's Cultural Affairs Commission under Mayor Jerry Brown, and that was in 1999 through 2005. Chris's important project is called Question Bridge, Black Males, which he'll be talking about today, produced with Hank Willis Thomas and a team including Kamal Sinclair and Bayete Ross Smith. Question Bridge won the 2015 International Center of Photography's Infinity Award, and in 2016, it was acquired and added to the collections of the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Art and Culture in Washington, the Oakland Museum of California, and the Harvey Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture in Charlotte, North Carolina. In 2016, Chris created a major multimedia exhibition at the Oakland Museum titled Who is Oakland, including an installation he created called The Best Way to Find a Hero. In 2018, Johnson created a billboard and bus shelter project for the Oakland Museum of California. The project is called A Question of Faith. In it, photographs by Dorothea Lange are mixed with the phrase, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice," first coined by the American transcendentalist Theodore Parker in 1853, and later, as many of us know, paraphrased by Dr. Martin Luther King in his speeches of the 1950s and 1960s. So please welcome Chris Johnson. So I thought we could start off because last night I was grading some papers, and one of the questions was for the students to identify key words in an article that they had read for class. And this word keywords is something that we see in academic publishing, oftentimes when a reader wants to give an advance to, an author wants to give an advance to readers about what are some key terms that are gonna be discussed in an article. And for our panel today, keywords are, among other things, Black. So I'd like to start off with Delphine and say, for Delphine, can you tell us, let's see if I can advance this. How does Black manifest in one of the works that you brought in for us to talk about today? We could talk about this one, Passageways, or we could talk about the other one of the other two, the Argentina work. Which one would you prefer?
I mean, let's go to the Argentina one.
Okay.
Because I think it's, even that one is good too. But this work is called.
Oh, your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. This work is called Black Like Blue in Argentina. And I had the opportunity to go to Argentina 2 years ago to present my film, The Cleanse. So I figured while I was there, I'll make some work, you know, and especially given the history of Argentina to be this place that erased literally its African heritage. So I did intense research to find the Blackness in Argentina and locate areas within the country to go and make work. And so it was very important for me to robe myself in blue. Blue is symbolic in my work as I like to evoke the deities, these ancient African deities, and the colors is significant. So to wear a blue dress that was a classic Argentine dress and wear it you know, against this background with my Black skin, you know, so Black is definitely present in the photo, and you know, and then what does it do, and who is this masked being who can see through cotton and cowrie shells, you know, so it's really important. So Black is just definitely, I think about the multi-dimension of the word and how it's definitely a layered word, how there's no one identity when we think about Blackness, and so yes, it's present in all of my work, and in this one in particular, I thought it was necessary to really, you know, present this figure who, because when we look at the history of Argentina, there's so much Blackness there, there's so much Africanness there, and it was important for me to uncover that.
Great. Should we look at this one since we rolled past it?
Yes, okay, so this is a project that I've been working on, and this is just one image of I have about 300 documents that I researched because I'm very, very interested in history and the archive. So I found these archival documents ranging from, you know, Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line initiative to photographs from the women's suffrage movement to the signing of the Independence of Declaration. And what I did is I screen printed all of these images of this woman within the history. So it's called In the Face of History. And what it is that she's a witness who sometimes history, when we look at history, his story, it definitely likes to erase people. But what I'm doing with this project is even in the idea of erasure, we were there. We were not. We were there, you know? And so this is the witness. I was there, you know? I am confronting you, even though you may have not acknowledged my presence, you know? So what's really interesting with this one is I took this series to Ghana, because Marcus Garvey also, there was also the Ghanaian office, and there's another photo, not this one, where the ship is more prominent, and people in Ghana automatically referenced the slave trade. And I was like, no, this is a very important history between the Americas and the Africa and the diaspora. And so even having those conversations in Accra based on this work was very, very interesting. But then even what was revealed to me that I wasn't familiar with was, I'm not sure if you all know of let me say her name properly, Adorko Kofi, who was the minister, the Ghanaian minister, a woman, prominent woman from Ghana, who was very interested, who worked with Marcus Garvey and was very interested in traveling to the Americas to now bridge this connection. And unfortunately, there was some tension within the Universal Negro movement, and somehow, I'm not sure what the end of this story, how this story ends, but she was assassinated in Florida. And so now it makes me think about these stories that are not investigated well, not documented well, and then we just have these names and then little bits of pieces of information, and how do we build these, what happened? I wanna know more about her life now. And so when I'm doing this, I'm always investigating the archive because I want to know more, because I know that these linear ways of looking at history is just doesn't even make sense. Right, all of us are here right now, but something is happening upstairs at the same time. So we only told this narrow story, we're not telling a full story. So yeah, so with this In the Face of History, it's really about me thinking about these events, but what happened, what really happened, who are the people that we don't know about, and how do we investigate them more to now make us really think of ourselves within this time from a more critical perspective.
Thank you. Chris, let's hear from you. Should we go right to your trailer, or do you want to talk over it? How should
Can we assume that everybody here has seen Question Bridge Black Males? Probably not. Okay, so I think it's a good idea to show the trailer.
Okay, let's do that. Make sure the sound is coming on, because sound is everything.
Black man, do you want to get out of the situation that you're in?
What is the reluctance to taking responsibility for improving our communities?
Are your children better or worse off as a result of your involvement?
Why wouldn't you be happy with this?
Why are you so violent?
Why do you have that tape mentality?
Why are you afraid of being intelligent?
Why?
Why?
What I want to know is why.
I believe that we incorporated a lot of things that are unhealthy to us.
We are supposed to be tough,
I can't let them see no type of sucker.
along with various other stereotypes.
The level of mentorship in our community is not as strong as it possibly could be.
When I came up, crack was a quick way for a black man to make $1 million.
Sometimes I think because we think we're black, we're some other kind of human beings, but we're just like most other human beings.
Why did y'all leave us the blueprint?
We did leave you a blueprint.
We just didn't tell you where it was. That's all.
Fear.
Some people harm their children.
I fear success.
Am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
That word, we have to stop using it.
I think black people can say nigga anytime they want.
How dare you? What right do you have to use this word?
A lot of nigga questions for the rapper.
What is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
This is the easiest question in the world to answer.
The thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are black.
My question is, I try to live good, but I'm surrounded by bad. And I want to know what it is I could do to do better and live peaceful, surrounded by all evil. How can I do that?
So, so what you're seeing is a methodology applied to the problem of what happens when we carry monolithic, simple versions of what it means to be a black male. The methodology is called Question Bridge, and I can talk about the origins of it because the lineage of it goes all the way back to my life when I grew up in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, when I saw the black community get divided because of the fair housing laws. Years later, I created an original project called Question Bridge Black Community that was charged with the problem of how do you create some kind of meaningful dialogue between parts of the black community that are invested in the hood and those that are not. What's a relevant way of trying to create some kind of healing conversation between these groups that actually need each other? They have meanings that are important. And so I created this methodology that allowed black men, the black community in that case, to not project opinions and assumptions upon each other, but simply ask questions. The assumption was that if you ask a question, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to listen to an answer, to create a more thoughtful exchange of meanings between people who might have systemic barriers against each other. So that was the methodology. And what you're seeing here is that method of inquiry being applied to the problem of monolithic stereotypes about black males. And so that's how blackness hopefully gets redefined as an epiphenomena, really, of just giving black men a chance to really, truly, sincerely express themselves. The hope is, for myself and the team, that you come away with a much more complex understanding of what it means to be black.
Thank you so much. So in the spirit of thinking about keywords, I think it's so great that the two of you are paired, because to me, it seems like there's another keyword that's in your work, and it's gender. That is to say, gender and the idea of sex identity and identification. So I was wondering maybe if we can start with Delphine, if you want to say anything about the idea of gender in your work.
Interestingly enough, when I first started making photographs, my subject matter was mostly black males. You know, I started photographing hip hop culture, and I noticed that, and even just gradually, just in taking photographs, just the random ones that I took outside of hip hop culture was male heavy, and I wanted to bring some type of balance to my work. I love that work, by the way, but I also wanted to bring a balance to my work, and I just started pointing the camera at myself. And not necessarily because thinking about, you know, a gender balance, but I just thought about a whole bunch of different issues, and pointing the camera on myself now did many things. We could talk about gender, but we could also talk about identity in terms of blackness, in terms of what does it mean to be African, you know, which is very important in my work. And yeah, so it was a way to have this multiple conversation about just the complexities of who we are as beings. Yeah.
Is this also you in this one?
Yes, yes. This is from a video that actually was here last year called The Cleanse. And in this work, I'm also investigating the archives, but in a different way. I was very interested in the conversation between Africa and the diaspora, which is, I'm always interested in that in my work. So one way of doing this was on the audio soundtrack, there's this conversation, like you'll hear Mende chanting. I'm Mende on my father's side. And the chanting was calling for the harvest, like harvest for rain. We need rain because we need it to nurture us. But I was also thinking about what water does to our hair and how it actually nurtures it. But then at the same time, you can hear someone say, "Don't wet my hair," you know. And so I was looking at all of these different conversations that could happen on one track. And at the same time that you hear the Mende chanting, you hear the trap artist saying, "Make it rain," you know. And so the track is very interesting in terms of these, but me using these words to make my own narrative about cleansing. And so also I investigated many writers like Toni Morrison and Ntozake Shange, and just took all of their words, James Baldwin, Gail Jones, Alice Walker, just took a bunch of words, even from the Quran and the Bible and the Ifa, and made one track that some people could read as one thing, but if you know some of these quotes, you'll say, "Oh, I know that, and I know this." And this is just a excerpt from it, where I was thinking about just from doing some of my own research about different ways of cleansing. And so here you see what appears to be blood coming through the hair, and there's cotton juxtaposed against the hair, and thinking about how heavily weighted these materials are when we think about the history of Africans in the world. And so I already forgot the question. Did I make
Gender.
a point? Gender. Okay, so
Yeah.
here and so when I look at even though this body is my body, it is a gendered body, I also think of it as a universal body. And I think that it's really important for us to even look at the body in that way, because if we do, then it holds more weight when we think about, the importance of respecting each, way of that we identify ourselves gender-wise. Yeah.
That's so great. I think, Chris, for you, what's interesting to me, too, is to see the back of the body here, the female body, and the way you present the men. It's always in that interview format, facing forward, engaging us. Can you talk a little bit about gender presentation in Question Bridge?
Yeah. Well, of course, I think of Question Bridge as being a really pragmatic solution to the problem of how do you evoke truth from people who, for lots of historic and cultural reasons, have barriers against expressing themselves freely.
Right.
So the way gender is implicated in Question Bridge Black Males was the problem of how do you create a space where men would authentically express themselves vulnerably, honestly, and that meant creating a space where women weren't present. That was one of the things that we quickly understood. Deb mentioned that Kamal Sinclair is one of the key collaborators in the project, but we sensed sort of conceptually that it would make things really different if she was anywhere around, and it turned out to be really true. even when Kamal was like downstairs interviewing people, the men who came upstairs felt differently about the project. So what we had to do is create a space that was populated by Black males for Black men, presented with the questions that came from other Black men,
Right.
so that there's a level of identification with the question and with the questioner, which creates a space within which the person could look inside and find an answer. And I think if you see the whole 3-hour project, you get so many different inflections of what it means to be a Black male. There's so many questions that deal with fatherhood and being a son, and what it means to be a man, a Black male, particularly in a racist culture. All of those things flow kind of naturally if you create the right kind of setting. So I think one of our objectives is that people coming into Question Bridge Black Males, the presence of it, they come in with an assumption about what a Black man is, and I hope even the trailer breaks that down, because you see so many different variations on the notion of Black malehood, and there's no common thread other than, Delroy says it, other than the fact that they're Black and they're males. You realize the multiplicity of expressions of maleness is inherent to the project. But I think that applies, that exclusivity that allows for vulnerability applies to all of the iterations of Question Bridge.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, that appropriate to the project's title, and of course the methodologies you talk about it, about these questions, and it's almost like a journalistic exercise there, because you get all the 5 W's, who are Black males, where is the blueprint, what is common to all of us insofar as what makes us who we are, what do you fear, how can I live good though I'm surrounded by evil, why wouldn't you be happy with your son being gay? Can you tell me which question for you is especially salient, even now, years after the making of the film?
Yeah. Actually, I guess I have to say that after making the project, and Hank and Bayate and Kamal and I spent 4 years making this project, the question that stands out for me after living with the project since it premiered in 2012 is not a question that's in the project itself, although there are many really incredibly poignant questions. Like, for example, the reason we ended with that question of how do you find a way to be a good person when you're surrounded by evil? I mean, all of us in one way or another entertain that question. So we put that at the end because we wanted to leave people with what we felt was the most poignant expression of the problem of humanness within the black body. But the question that stands out for me after being in this project for all these years is, what is it about the human experience of the person that generated that question? Because that leads to very deep water. I mean, a good example is one of the men that we encountered in Chicago. No, I'm sorry, it was in New Orleans. His question was, speaking to another black man, do you blame your mother for the fact that you didn't have a father in your life? So that's a really deep and probing question. And I would love to know, what is the life experience that generated that question? And so I feel as if, with enough funding and enough infinite time, it would be wonderful to go back and say, you asked this question, here are the answers that the project generated, but can you share more about the life experience that gave birth to that question? I think that would lead to volumes of meaning that would again follow naturally from the project itself.
That's terrific. I prepped each of you. Delphine, I wanted to ask you in terms of your practice. You're a balance of someone who's working as an artist, as a writer, as a publisher. Can you tell us about how these different aspects of your professional life work together and feed each other, and what it means for you to sort of hold all of those things in the air at once?
Yeah, it's definitely an amazing. I feel blessed to be able to have produced MoAD, Women Photographers of the African Diaspora. Myself and Leila Amatullah Bahrain, who's the co-founder, we were heavily inspired by the work of Dr. Deborah Willis and her doing Reflections in Black and Black, a Celebration of Culture, all of these collective initiatives in order to create documents and to preserve the history of what we were doing in the world. And so taking that inspiration, we wanted to do this book around, African women photographers of the African diaspora, because in our own lives, we were interacting with so many of these photographers around the world, and we knew that by doing this, we would also contribute to that historical record. And so in doing that, it opened up my eyes to how much I really, I know I love photography as a maker of photographs, but I didn't realize how much I also enjoyed just looking at other works, other photographers. And so the whole editing process was just an overwhelming sense of joy to see more so of what other women were interested in, how they, even though we found similarities in terms of spirituality and family and gender, all of these different things, everyone had a unique take to how they were presenting this work, and that was really fascinating. So now I see myself, balancing this life of making work, but also caring for the works that other people make and thinking about ways to put them into the world in non-traditional ways. And that all happened, the book happened, and then now I find myself curating. Oh my God, I'm afraid to even call myself a curator. I'm this is a part of my creative practice, is doing this collective work, is what I like to think about it, because I think about all of the research that goes into these topics and everything. But in terms of creating this space now where some of the women are saying, this is the first time that I've been exhibited in a museum, or because of this platform, now I'm shooting for this place. So being able to use myself in terms of a way to move, and I think of it as a movement. And I'll say over and over forever of how the ability to just use yourself and extend yourself to others is so inspiring, from my mom and also from Dr. Deborah Willis, this idea of extending yourself. And I feel like my life wouldn't be balanced if a part of me was not extending myself to the community, so that's the balance. It becomes a part of who I am.
Such a perfect segue, because the question I wanted us to move to before we take questions from the audience is this idea of engagement, this idea of, as teacher, as a carer of things, which is what a curator does. That's the source of the word. How you see yourself extending yourself to audience. I can turn over to you, Chris, and then we can come back to Delphine.
Yeah, that's a really humbling question, obviously, because what it speaks to is the fact that when you look at any person's creative process, you're really seeing the arc of a life, which has a dynamic that comes from what I feel is a driving existential question that motivates all behaviors. And so in my life, a quick summary shows that I, grew up in Bed-Stuy, moved to California, got really involved with the fine art community here, which was very white. My teachers were Ansel Adams and Imogen Cunningham and Wynn Bullock, which I feel real grateful for. But through a chain of circumstances, I find myself deeply embedded back in the Black community, contributing to the cohesion of the Black community, hopefully, raising awareness about Black issues, being drawn back into Black family in ways that wouldn't have been predicted in the middle if you only took that slice. And so it's a little hard to know exactly where agency lies. I feel almost as if I shouldn't be considered the creator of the work. I feel almost as if I'm being carried by a force that is larger than myself. And I think that it really is a blessing to have the opportunity to do that, if that's a fair answer to your question.
Yeah. I mean, you both have presences here, obviously, in the Bay Area. I mean, for you, Delphine, right now you're an artist in residence. Is that still current at the Center for Book Arts here?
Not here in New York.
In New York?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was wondering
Yeah.
which one it was. Yeah. But as a public presence, as an artist, and extending yourself in that very maybe vulnerable, but also maybe generative way.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely vulnerable, especially when you're pointing the camera at yourself. That's extremely vulnerable. But I also wanted to say that as a person, I remember a long time ago, I always just being concerned, I guess even being in college, like when you're in college, you want to change the world, right? And I always knew that the way that people were educated has a lot to do with the way that they participate in the world. So when we would face all of these challenges, I'm always in my brain trying to solve problems. And for me, it always went back to education. And so for 10 years of my life, I did work as a public school teacher, teaching only Black and Latino men in the South Bronx and then in Harlem. And as a teacher, now I'm seeing, you start to think all of the things that you were always interested in and knew that you had to uncover these horrible representations of people of African descent in the history. And if you did that, then and people were enlightened about that, they would see themselves differently and they would participate in the world differently. And so even as an artist, I'm talking to my students all the time. And because in that space, like in the South Bronx, I actually remember a young man saying to me, I don't think I will live past the age of 18, right? Or some of my students who were involved in gangs outside of the school, they would never bring it into the school, but you knew what was going on outside. But how being in that transformative spaces of saying, listen, you don't come from, you come from greatness. Like how that, I actually saw that transform minds. And so, real time, right now, some of my students contact me on Facebook and they're like, you're really doing it. They're I'm proud of them, but they're doing the work. These are the same students. I have a student who he was a big guy in the Crips. And he emailed me on Facebook and say, I tell my children and my wife every single day that if it wasn't for that school, I don't even think I would be alive. And that's real work. So I'm thinking about this idea of uncovering and seeing the world differently from how, this westernized, oppressive patriarchy, that's not the way. You don't have to be caught up in that. It's like the Matrix. You don't have to do it that way. And thinking about that there is something that's so simple that doesn't even require money, really, right? That it's about the way that we see this mental revolution that could happen and actually make a difference. And I think that that's what I'm really concerned about in terms of whatever I put out in the world. So for example, when people say, oh, we didn't know that there were any black women photographers. Oh, here they are, see? It's right here. And then there's so many, you know, and so kind of just uncovering and seeing the world in a different way is something that I feel is so, so, so important and a part of, this journey. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Chris, do you want to add anything, or should
Sure. Well, of course, you know, part of what emerged in that arc that I was describing before in my creative process is a phase that was deeply involved with fine art portraiture, which is, you know, pretty formal and classic, and very personal in the fact that I was doing self-portraits and portraits of my mother, and, you know, there were a lot of very inner-directed themes. But the transition, I guess 20 more years ago, to engaged art, you know, where you're using the creative process very specifically to try to address deep social, political, economic problems, where artists are creating things that aren't just valuable potentially, but are useful, tapping into resources that are there, but the creative process can unfold. Like, people will often ask, are the people who speak so eloquently and so fluidly in Question Bridge projects, are they coached in any way? I mean, how are they able to be so articulate? And of course, there's an inherent problem with that question, as we all know. But I think when you are in the presence of someone who feels safe in that moment, what they're tapping into is a pool of questions, a cloud of questions that they move through the world as. I think any marginalized person moves through the world under a cloud of questions that they don't have any way to express. And so I think of Question Bridge as being simply a way to create a channel for the expression of this inner dialogue that's always happening, that when you see it, feels like a revelation. So again, as I said, it's simply a pragmatic solution to the problem of how you take meanings that are hidden and bring them to the surface. And I feel really blessed, you know, to have stumbled onto this project that makes that happen. And it's led to lots of other projects that you described, you know, like the Question of Faith project, or the Best Way to Find a Hero project. I mean that comes from, you know, again, a very simple, pragmatic answer to the question, like, what is the best way to find a hero? Well, what I did was I took the map of Oakland and divided it into the red districts that are considered to be bad neighborhoods by developers, right? And I clustered those into a map of themselves and threw darts at it. And then I simply went to where the dart landed and said, tell me about your life. I mean, it couldn't be a more simple way. And of course, you know, all of the videotapes that I gathered from that process were people who were, you know, under duress, you know, struggling against crime and bad schools, but raising proud families. You know, it was I was able to do it in a weekend because all the people who were under those darts were people who you would love to know. So that's just an example of how, you know, if you understand that there's a humanity there that needs addressing, and as a creative person, you know, you have an opportunity, you have the blessing, you know, and the privilege of being able to generate projects that can move toward creating opportunities for expression, you are blessed.
We have a little time before the session ends. I want to open it up for questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. First, I want to express my deep, deep gratitude for you guys showing up in the way that you have. For me right now, it feels like ancestrally and divinely set forth, because it's like right in the midst of my own kind of showing up. And so in that, I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about, if you could tell me about that moment when you felt, because I'm sure this work is coming out of a lifetime of kind of sitting with things that you observed and things that you felt. And I want to know, like, where that moment was when you went from, this is a problem, and then you decided to do something about it in the way that you have done. Thank you.
Wow. Well, that's a question that again invites really deep and personal answers. And I wish I had examples here to show you. I mean, I've given you some examples of how, you know, an experience of seeing the rupture in the Black community as a teenager, when I would go back home and realize that Bed-Stuy is not what it used to be, because once the people who had the means left, it created this division. 40 years later, being offered an opportunity to create a project that was open-ended and thinking, well, gee, you know, I can do something about the distance that's emerged between those two parts of black culture. I mean, that was an epiphany, and I know exactly where I was in the world when I thought, gee, this idea might work, of getting people to simply ask a question rather than projecting an opinion. So that was, I feel like I want to put a plaque on that place on the street where I thought, gee, this idea, I would be creating a question bridge. Gee, that's cool.
Yeah.
So there are lots of those, but there are more. I mean, for every individual piece of my personal artwork, there is one of those epiphanic moments, for sure. And one that goes back to a piece that I did about child abuse, was inspired by a piece of writing that my mother did when she was in the hospice and she was suffering from cancer and she had a stroke. And she underlined a piece in a journal that I gave her that she wrote. She said, "Please give me back my hand and foot." And she underlined that. And she had tied me up hand and foot to punish me when I was 5 years old. And I realized that through this, you know, strange, almost cosmic event, that she and I were kind of connected through suffering. And I realized I need to make a piece of work about that story. That's how that piece emerged. But there's a story like that associated with every piece of fine art, and any artist would share it with you if they had a chance.
And for you, Delphine?
I think one of the things that when I used to teach, sometimes we would say, you know, we're planting seeds, because you know that you're not going to see immediate responses, but over time, like the story I told you of my student reaching out to me years later, even though like we both cried together right before graduation, because I'm like, you have to graduate, you know, but so I always think, I think as an artist, you know, you're solving these problems in your head, and then you don't even know how it's going to be received in the world. And so those little instances when someone emails you and they're like, oh my goodness, that video, it changed my life, you know, and then you're like, wow, you know what I mean? Or even like for me, going to Argentina and being around a bunch of Afro-Argentines who said that they literally feel invisible in their own country. And like just on that same trip, a lady was being yelled at someone from his car who cursed at her for being black. This happened 2 years ago. And so in that space, looking at this video of this black woman watching the hair, turn her hair from straight into, she's pulling it from, you know, seeing the, what do we call it, the length, whatever, right? And being so happy and seeing the beauty in that, how that was an act of resistance, of revolution, of everything within that space was really shocking for me, because I didn't expect it, you know? And so you never know what art does in the world, like what it does on an individual level. And I feel like that's what it's about. It's about this mental thing, this you know, mental awareness that happens. Yeah, so I think that that's what it is. It's just like this thing that you don't pinpoint it. You don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but you're honest to yourself and you put it out into the world, and then it affects people how it does.
Thank you. Another question from our audience? Yes, Ramakant.
Hello there. Thank you very much for your comments. My question is, what is the future of safe?
The future of safe?
Safe. Like you mentioned the idea of creating a safe space for people to be who they are, to be vulnerable and authentic.
Right.
Right? What do you feel as though the future of that? Because the world is becoming more and more and more unsafe. Right?
It's so easy to think of jargon, like for example, I would say justice. Isn't justice intended to create safety?
That's the intent.
Isn't that the intention?
Yeah.
Is there a future for justice? I think it's up to us. You know, it's up to voting. I mean, that's that issue. Even things as fundamental as the rule of law are in contention at this moment. So it's a little hard at this moment to envision what that is. All I know is it's that, you know, it's our responsibility as human beings, not just artists and citizens, to try to, through compassion, create as much safety as you can through the action of your life.
I wonder if it's in those moments of recognition, for you, Delphine, talking about your project with the photography publication being sold out. I mean, maybe that's in itself a measure of either recognition, safety, a combination thereof. I don't know.
Yeah, because when we did it, we self-published. We had no idea how this thing was going to be received in the world, but we did it because we really believed in what we were doing. And we had been rejected by publishers and all of that stuff. And so Layla and I were like, listen, we're just going to do this and put it out in the world. And the overwhelming response, through press, through being, speaking here, and here, it was absolutely amazing. And so, so what happened is that I feel like in doing that, there was this space of, okay, you could dream. You're allowed to dream. Like, you can dream, and there are possibilities. And I think about, because someone in the video just said, they asked, well, how come you all didn't leave us a blueprint? And he's like, we did leave you a blueprint. And I feel like this is why going back and figuring out what people did before, like something that you would think that I was a preacher in the classroom, because that's I was obsessed with Frederick Douglass and the fact that he wrote this book in order to, really let these, white folks in the North vote against this. Like, this is not good, this slavery. So using his life story to say slavery is inhumane, to the point to say, you all are good Christians, do you see what you do? And looking at his language, right? So now here is someone doing this during the time when it is the law of the land says that you are not even a person. And today, the law, even though people are acting crazy, the law is at least saying this, right? So therefore, do we have a choice? What if someone could know that they're free during the time when the law says that you're not free? Then we don't have excuses. We just don't, right? And so I always go back to that to look at those blueprints that were left for us, and to open up our eyes to say, okay, yes, we are living in a crazy world, but there was also a time that people were literally in chains. And they knew in their minds that they were not slaves. And that's to me, like, come on, right? How could so that's what I thrive on. That's what I thrive on. And so whether I'm talking to my kids at home or, young people in the classrooms, that's what we have to know that.
Thank you. It's time for us to stop, and I'm so happy to let you know where these artists are and how you can find them and ask them questions later on this afternoon. But thank you again for your attention, and I'm so proud to be on a panel with fellow native Brooklynites too. I feel like Brooklyn is represented. I know.
I just want to thank MoAD for inviting us to be here and to share this program with Deb and Dr. Rayford. It was really great.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. We have performances coming up.